actually brings me beautifully onto my next story this evening. That wasn't deliberate, ladies and gentlemen, but also breaking tonight. The Prime Minister has delivered a major speech mentioning the threat of China.
A country that poses real national security threats to the United Kingdom. With all that in mind, the absence of engagement is just staggering, a dereliction of duty, because it means that, unlike our allies, we have not been standing up for our interests. Well, no more. It's time for a serious approach, to reject the simplistic binary choice, neither golden age nor ice age, and recognise the plain fact that you can work and trade with a country while still protecting yourself.
So is the Prime Minister taking the threat of China seriously? Because the US is, it said last week in a briefing to GB News that Beijing was more of a threat than Russia. So let's speak now to China commentator and author of China's Urban Revolution, Austin Williams. Austin, thank you for joining us this evening. So no exchange of pandas in sight at the moment between China and the UK. And should there be? Where are we at with China? How frightened should we be of them?
Well, look, I mean, I think, ironically, and you won't hear me say this very often, but Starmer had a point there when he said we have to deal with China. I mean, it's the second biggest economy in the world, and we would be foolish not to have some of that dosh, especially at a time when we need it so desperately. So, you know, Starmer's very keen on international diplomacy. As a matter of fact, somebody was once saying that Starmer visits Britain might be a headline that we read very soon because he's so rarely in the country. So he likes that Davos versus Westminster playing on the world stage. So we understand some of the remits that he's got. But I do think he has a point that, you know, if we are going to be seen as gaining some of the benefits, if you like, from Brexit, which is going on the world stage and making deals. Not that we're necessarily going to get a trade deal with China anytime soon, but I think that kind of negotiated position of really kind of putting ourselves forward and seeing ourselves as a positive player, rather than retreating and have everything bought by China in this country, and we become China's poodle. I think there's something in what he says. Whether he does it or not, I think his fat chance springs to mind, because ultimately he seems to be kind of acting tough, but has very little to substantiate it. As a matter of fact, when he talks about the threat of China, which was a very ironic statement, you know, that China is a threat and that's why we have to deal with them. But I do think that given the fact that Rachel Reeves did a budget where she didn't even mention defence spending, let alone anything of clarity in terms of where we stand in the world, you know, there's a lot of confusion out there. But I think the essence of it, if it were to be made good, which I doubt, then I think I'd be supportive.
And what would that look like, making it good, as somebody that understands that country very well? Because Sir Keir Starmer stressed, he said, China remained a nation of immense scale, ambition and ingenuity, and a defining force in technology, trade and global governance. So how do you work with a country that's that powerful whilst also having your political wits about you?
Well, I mean, so political wits starts from the fact that in this country, in the UK, we've obviously kind of gone in hock to net zero, and we've almost destroyed our own industries on the back of green politicking, while China is becoming a world leader in green. So we've almost like given them center stage by our own mismanagement. But at the same time, I do find that China's economy is not as grand and as dynamic and as successful and as stable as maybe we've been led to believe. So there are kind of openings in global markets. I mean, in some ways, we talk about those kind of soft power issues, the education, the media, the literature, all those kind of film, those kind of things, which actually we have been selling to China for quite some time. China's now starting to make up its own market. But I do think we do have one thing which China doesn't yet have, which is, we used to call it democracy. It's a failing model in the West, so we have to reestablish it. But I think if we could try to develop some sense of immersing China in what we have in terms of positive ability to speak our minds about our ability to think for ourselves, then that'll be quite something. Obviously, we have to start to do that in UK first before we can export it. But you get my drift.
I get it. I know exactly what you're saying there. Thank you, Austin. Austin Williams there, the author of China's Urban Revolution. Hello, I'm Bev Turner. Now, it can feel like the money in our bank accounts at the moment does not keep up with the cost of living. And maybe there's a solution. I'm here today with the CEO of TallyMoney, Cameron Parry. Cameron, what is TallyMoney?
Well, Bev, with TallyMoney, you get a current account and a debit card, but instead of pounds, you use milligrams of gold as your everyday money.
So why gold?
Gold traditionally is a great store of value. It has, on average, gone up at over 11% per annum for the last 25 years against the pound. It's tripled in value in the last decade. And in the last 2 years alone, it's increased by 50% against the pound. Banks' savings products just can't compete with that level of growth.
But this isn't just about gold. This is about a currency that you guys have created at TallyMoney. Explain it to me as though I'm an idiot.
So, look, people need to be able to hold their earnings and build their savings in a money that retains its value and remains in their legal control and remains theirs to access, away from government control.
Great. You had me at not exposed to government control.
You should feel safe and happy with your money. You should have peace of mind the more money you see in your bank balance. And that's the type of thing we're trying to deliver and give people choice in the type of money they get to use every day.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Cameron. Thank you. Now, a whistleblower has said that special forces war crimes in Afghanistan, in inverted commas, are a stain on the memory of British soldiers who lost their lives fighting the Taliban. A public inquiry was also told that the director of the special forces made a conscious decision to cover up the allegations to protect the reputation of the elite units. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump has permanently paused migration from all third world countries, with America pausing visas for all Afghan passport holders, even those who worked with America during that 20-year war. I'm joined now by the former chairman of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood, to talk about these two completely different positions. Tobias, thank you very much for joining me. So, is it appropriate for the British authorities to try to hold SAS officers to account for things that happened years ago? It feels incredibly unpatriotic.
Yes, I can understand that feeling, but I served in the armed forces, and I think the British public would like to know that wherever the armed forces are sent, that we act with integrity. We are trained to the most highest professional standards, and we have that reputation around the world. And I'm pleased to say that in most situations, that's exactly what our armed forces do, including our special forces. But clearly, there are some questions to be answered here. It was appropriate for the Ministry of Defence to ask for this inquiry to go ahead. What I'm puzzled to see is why, halfway through this investigation, Lord Justice Hayden Cave, who's running the inquiry, chooses to release redacted documents, evidence taken over a year ago, halfway through before he's reached his conclusion. And it doesn't help the reputation of the armed forces as a whole at the very time when we're trying to advance our defence posture. The world's getting more dangerous, not less. I would have liked to have seen the inquiry reached its conclusion, come out with its recommendations, allowing the MOD to then respond exactly to what's happened in Afghanistan. That's not the case here. What we're now left with is an awful lot of speculation, which damages the reputation of the army as a whole, and I think that's deeply unhelpful.
But the SAS are our SAS is the best trained forces in the world. They will have had such meticulous detail and planning into those operations. They would have then had granular analysis in their debriefing of any of these operations. Doesn't this just feel like a huge waste of money on lawyers, Tobias? And also, what message does it give to our forces that we might come back and start to comb through things that happened years ago in the middle of war? I think there's huge questions to be asked about whether this is what the British public would even want to happen.
I think the British public would want to know that wherever we send our armed forces, that they actually uphold those rules of engagement that they're sent to follow. They uphold the Geneva Conventions as well. I hear what you're saying by saying it's happened a long time ago. We shouldn't dust over anything that's happened in the past and soldiers feel they can get away with it. I would agree with you that there shouldn't be unnecessary witch hunts. We've seen that in Northern Ireland, where it's been absolutely ridiculous. When after the Good Friday Agreement, because people weren't convicted prior to that, we had IRA prisoners released after murdering many people, doing 2 years in prison, and then released because of the agreement. But in this situation, it's different, where we've actually had the SAS soldiers themselves say that there was errant behavior taking place. That's the difference here. Quite rightly, it needs to be investigated. My concern is why release documents halfway through that investigation that's leading to speculation. I would like to see the entirety concluded and then for the MOD to make judgments on what actually happened in there. I have to say, from what's been released so far, there are some big questions to be answered, and it would be wrong for us to dismiss that and just simply move on.
Just draw a comparison, if you would, for a minute, Tobias, with President Trump here in America. There was the terror attack here in Washington, D.C. only last week, in which 2 National Guard soldiers were shot. One of them sadly died, one of them still fighting for their life. The response from President Trump to that was one of, some would say, impulsive discrimination, and other people would say absolute strength in the eye of potential threats, which is to pause the visas of anybody from Afghanistan, whether they work with America or not. How do you view that reaction through your British lens?
Yeah, it's a very difficult one indeed. We went into Afghanistan to liberate the country. We took responsibility for it, and then slowly we gave up and handed the country back to the very insurgents that we went in there to defeat. And now we're left with this very difficult situation of some migrants, some very bad apples, actually undermining the support that we're giving to majority of the population that are very well behaved indeed. I've been involved in terrorist attacks. I lost my brother to a terrorist attack. I'm very conscious of the fact that any government needs to be seen to be very strong in dealing with non-state actors in this way. It's important, though, that we not only remain vigilant, but actually do the right thing. I think overreaction can actually lead to then further consequences. Afghanistan is an unfinished story because we've walked away and left it in the hands of an insurgency regime that's now not able to control that country. There's another terrorist organization, ISIS-K, now taking over from what the Taliban did before, and that's going to come back and haunt us again in the future.
Yeah, OK, Tobias, fascinating. Thank you so much. Former Chairman of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood there. I could feel you wanting to get in on that, my panel here. Laurie?
Yes, so I do not agree to discriminate wholeheartedly against all Afghan people that are under the SIV special visa program. Because of the relationship the United States and agreement that we had with them for almost 2 decades, that they gave up their lives, they gave up their identities in order to support the United States intelligence and military communities in trying to end global terror and Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. And then to the way that the withdrawal happened was not a very good strategic move. It fell apart. Many service members, I believe 13 or 14, even lost their lives in that evacuation efforts. But those people, we promised them, and I worked with them, that we would protect them when the time came to get them out of the country. And I stand behind that and believe that we should be continuing to do so. And I actually processed the first group of Afghan evacuees that came at Fort Pickett in Virginia after they went through all the proper vetting. I also worked on biometrics, which is done for each of these individuals. In a span of 20 days straight, we processed over 15,000 people at just one military installation, okay? That's how many people were coming through. But I say that to say this individual worked with one of the most specialized units within the CIA.
You mean the perpetrator of the murders last week?
Correct. The man who has been being charged for this attack. The vetting that he went through was incredible. He also started at a very young age. What I want to say to your viewers is, this is under active investigation. But you can do all the vetting you want about a person's history, their past. But you cannot predict, Bev, the future of any individual that's living on this planet, right? And so that doesn't excuse anything but the argument about how did he go through vetting. He went through multiple administrations' vetting, in fact, and he was determined that he could stay here and remain here in this country. That's all I want to say about that. So to penalize all Afghans, I think, is not only short-sighted, it's going to be very dangerous, especially for those individuals and their families.
It's a really difficult issue because I think it demonstrated a show of strength in the aftermath of that atrocious, cold-blooded attack on the streets of DC last week. But it is a difficult thing to do, isn't it, Thomas? Like Laurie says, you can't predict. In fact, we're going to be talking to somebody about, because more has emerged about that perpetrator from last week. We're going to be interviewing somebody to find out a bit more about him. It looks like he was radicalised whilst he was here.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. You can't predict what people are going to do. So I would then argue, why are we bringing these people over? You know, this idea that these people were sort of heroes in Afghanistan is not true. They were doing it for money. They were being paid by the Americans. There's not many jobs in Afghanistan, so they were willing to go out there and be paid. And most of them were smart people. So I would argue they should stay in their country and build their own government and try and fix Afghanistan instead of fleeing to another nation. So I think it's just a disaster that we keep bringing these people in.
Okay.